Welcome to Breaking the Narrative, a Stand With Us Canada podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Primoreno, and in each episode, we'll dive into the fight against anti-Semitism and the delegitimization of Israel. From student leaders to community advocates, we'll explore how people are standing up and making a difference. New episodes drop every other Thursday, so let's get into this week's conversation. Welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Narrative, a Stand With Us Canada podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Primoreno, and thrilled to be joined today by Natasha Pein, writer, educator, researcher, and co-founder and executive director of the Stop Antizionism movement. Natasha has a book coming out, which is a big part of why we wanted to bring her on today to talk about her work, as you'll learn through the title, Unmasking Antizionist Tactics, A New Face of Old Hate, aligns very well with what we talk about here on this program, right? This notion that anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hatred in the world, and that we have a responsibility to understand the way that it presents itself in the modern world, and address it in a new and modern way. And so I'm thrilled to have Natasha on today. It's really cool to have somebody who spends, who's committed their time, their career to focusing and researching this specific issue. I always talk about how we have the facts on our side. And so it's really important that we learn those facts, we learn the history, and we understand how it can inform our future and our present. So Natasha, thank you so much for joining us today. Happy to have you on.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
So I mentioned a very, very little bit about you and your background. It's quite extensive. Your story is, fascinating, and we'll talk more about it as, the podcast goes on. But can you tell us a little bit more about, your work and I guess why this is so important to you and, your experience, through time that's brought you to this moment today?
Yes, sure. So first I would like to mention I was born in the former Soviet Union. Many people don't even know nowadays what is Soviet Union. Especially depends how the age of people. But the Soviet Union was a communist country, and this is where I was born. I immigrated. We left Soviet Union when I was before my bat mitzvah, which is before 12. And I have a lot of memories in the Soviet Union living as a Jew. It was a trauma that was created for me because I was bullied regularly. It was basically, I remember that one day when I brought a matzah during Passover to school, and it was in my hand, and I was late 2 minutes. The teacher put me in the classroom in the corner for the whole classroom for 45 minutes, humiliating. And after the class, I had people call me Zhidovka, like kids. And Zhidovka is a slur for a Jew. And it was on a regular basis. I was bullied because I was a Jew. But the kids don't understand the difference. So in the Soviet Union, the propaganda was all about anti-Zionist propaganda. So it's this experience through anti-Zionist propaganda that I experienced bullying because I was a Jew. But kids understood that Zionist meant a Jew. Mm-hmm. And therefore, all the regular anti-Zionist propaganda, which is, they would say Israel is bad, Zionists are bad, but it's translated to Jews being bullied on a regular basis. And I wouldn't have, even though I would like to have friends who are non-Jews, but they wouldn't be my friends because I was a Zhidovka, I was a Jew, right? So, and this was a typical scenario in the Soviet Union. So your identity was stripped out from you, and you cannot openly show that you are a Jew. And from this trauma, when I see what's happening today, it's very sad to see. To me, it's like a recurring situation. What I experienced in the Soviet Union, and it's scary. It's all of a sudden like what I see on the street after October 7, and I felt like this is not good because the propaganda is there and people accepting it without realizing what it is. People don't fight, they don't speak up, and the Canadians. Mm-hmm. And this is why I decided, along with Dr. Naya Lech, to co-found it. The Stop Antizionism. Both me and Naya Lech are the Soviet, from a ex-Soviet country. So basically, we understand what Soviet propaganda means and what can it do to you. And, from Soviet trauma to strategic action, this is what we bring. The education for the Stop Antizionism, the actual key pillars, so one of them is education, the declarations we'll talk about as well, and why is it so important, and how do we fight anti-Zionism? Because as we understand the genealogy of it, This is what I've been speaking about all along. It's how we got here, how, what it is and how we can get out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you're so uniquely positioned to talk about this as you've just described, because fortunately for us, the generations, I should say the Canadians who come from generations of Canadians who have been here since, World War II, World War I, even in some cases and beyond, life in Canada was tenable for Jews for decades, right? There was anti-Semitism and persecution and all sorts of, but it was not nearly what it is today. Whereas in, the Soviet Union and other countries outside of the West, that anti-Semitism never went away, right? It was there, and it was something that you experienced not only as it related to your Jewish identity, but also like you're describing, hearing these dog whistles for anti-Zionist, right? When really we know what they're talking about, and that's exactly what happens today. When we see on campus, Zionists not welcome in this club. We know what they're saying. We know who they're trying to exclude. But now our society has given them permission to use this language of Zionist to exclude Jews from where they're coming from where they're trying to get into.
Exactly.
And so you have this perspective, and it's great because it is the first thing I kind of wanted to jump into is this notion of, anti-Zionism equaling anti-Semitism, right? We always say the two things are one and the same. And that's the biggest struggle we have, is that when it comes to world opinion, the court of law, most people do not understand the connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. They think one is a political issue and one is a hate crime, whereas the truth is that we know anti-Zionism is a part of our Jewish identity, which makes it one and the same. And so you've written a lot about this, and you've talked a lot about the anti-Zionist era as a part of the three eras of anti-Semitism. And I'd love to sort of walk through that framework that you've created of these three eras, from the idea of understanding where we're coming from and why that history is so important, and also, of course, where we are today.
Yes. So basically, the three dominant eras of Jew hatred are anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism. So Jew hatred is the oldest and most continuous and most acceptable hate in the world, unfortunately. And it predates the Roman Empire. Jew hatred never disappears, it adapts. And like Rabbi Jonathan Sacks famously warns us that Jew hatred is actually, it mutates. And Dr. Nayalecht extends this further in her research, in that she actually discovers that she reveals consistent pattern that in every era, Jews are accused of violating of the supreme virtue of that era. So of the highest moral good. Whatever that highest moral good is in each era. And then Jew haters construct Jews as demons. So this is a very important thing to understand, because it doesn't matter which era you're in, it's whether it is anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, or anti-Zionism. So in anti-Judaism era, you will see as an example, because Jew haters actually also, the society has a moral, they defined what the moral highest good is. So, and then Jew haters use that language into actually construct Jews as villain, using that specific language. And in every accusations will always change and adapt based on what the language is. So, and you'll see it in Dr. Nayalecht's research of how she actually talks about that, because when you look at anti-Judaism, which is a religious part of Jew hatred, then you'll see that the construction of what was the highest moral good at that time, that was the spiritual purity and salvation.
Right.
And how Jews were constructed, basically as a villain, and they're basically constructed as Christ killers. If you live in Europe, but if you live in Middle East and North Africa, they were constructed as Muhammad killers,
right,
because they violated the purity of religion. Right. Basically, and that's how the libels came about as well. But when you look at anti-Semitism, so it's all about racial. Right, it's all about the purity of race. So then Jews were constructed as racial polluters, right? Because they violate the purity of race, and that's how the libel came as a racial polluters. And when you look at anti-Zionism, when the language adapts again, and mutates again, then in anti-Zionist era, what is the highest moral good? It is decolonization, the human rights, the social justice, the anti-racism. And then what is actually, this time they attacked the Jewish nation. And the Jewish nation, so basically in violation, anti-Zionism, basically accuses Jewish nation violating violating the social justice and violating basically being racist and oppressors. And that is what you see right now. That's what projects onto Israel. Right? And therefore, this is where you see colonizers, and apartheid libel and genocide libels.
Right. And the idea basically that you're saying is that these libels aren't just constructed in a way to demonize Israel, but to do it in a very intentional way around the climate that it currently exists in, right? And to
always
say, okay,
about the language.
Right.
Always using the language of that era to actually project onto and how to accuse the Jew. It will always adapt.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how that the progression has gone, I guess, like you said, from religion to to race, to this theory now of, like, I guess it's progressive ideology altogether, because you talk not only about decolonization but also apartheid and sort of like these other notions that people are so quick to believe, I guess, in today's world, because it's hard to know very much about Israel. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is that people don't know where to draw that line between what is a legitimate criticism of a government and its policy, and what is simply a constructed libel to demonize an entire group of people. And so how do you, I think, talk a lot on our side about, well, if you're talking, like we say it, I guess, in very simple terms, especially like when speaking to students on campus, it's, well, if you're accusing Israel of something that you would accuse any other country of, right? Then this is fine. This is normal, and this is something that's going to happen. But how do you, as somebody who has studied this extensively, where's your line analytically as it relates to what crosses into anti-Semitism versus legitimate criticism of Israel?
So criticism of Israel or any other country, it is criticism of its policies of the government, right? And criticism should not kill, should not intimidate, should not harass. So that is a criticism of pure, a fair criticism of a country. But when we're looking at harassments that the Jews are facing around the world, and they begin coded as Zionist, then and all of a sudden we have shootings in the Jewish day schools.
Right.
We have a woman stabbed in the Ottawa supermarket because she was in the kosher section. That's not criticism. This is pure Jew hatred. And this is Jew hatred mutated. You cannot tell me that this was because of criticism of Israel. There's no criticism here. This is all anti-Zionism.
Well, I think the other thing that's important to highlight is that, the other argument could be made by an anti-Zionist person that, well, this wasn't about Israel. This was just an anti-Semitic hate crime. And then you'd hear them, their bleeding hearts, oh, it's terrible. This, this Jewish woman, what a poor victim. But in reality, this is their attempt to cover up this woman would not have been stabbed in that grocery store, in 2021 or 2020, 2019, right? Like, there's no surprise that these types of incidents have now spiked post October 7th, 2023, when these genocide libels have started to now make their way into the mainstream and become, basically common truth to most of the Western world.
Yes.
That's the part that we need to talk about, is that, this is not just anti-Semitism, but it's blatant anti-Zionism, which shows you why the two are one and the same.
Yes, because also what happened in Washington to people in a museum in Washington, when it was killed, the persons yelled, free Palestine. Right? It was not about, the hating Jews. It was about free Palestine. So this is anti-Zionism.
Well, but again,
I know what you mean. And
no, I'm agreeing with you. I was going to say, it's just further this idea that they come and say free Palestine, and then you hear the free Palestine supporter saying, well, he was a Zionist, that's the scariest part about anti-Zionism.
Yes, and this is how it's always perceives, Jew hatred is always perceived as virtuous. And this is actually why, like Dr. Nyler says, it's the most dangerous Jew hatred of our time, because like any time Jew hatred is, because it's always virtuous, but specifically the Western anti-Zionism is extremely dangerous because it uses the language of the social justice, and when you use the language of social justice, it looks great. Like what? If you're actually going to go against us, then you actually go against the current, right? And the language of this current sacred language, it makes it look, anti-Zionism make it look like it's defending the sacred and the righteousness of this, of anti-Zionism, right?
Yeah.
And this is why we're in this situation where people say it's okay to kill the Jews, because you start with libels, then they escalate, and then it goes into excluding Jews from the society. Libels always lead to violence, and the libels has been used for generations, for centuries, libeling Jews and conspiracy theories. This is how it leads to Jews, isolating Jews from society. Once they isolated and boycott Jews from society, it's very easy to actually to harass Jews, and then go to the next step, which is part of the cycle of libel, is commit violence and oppression and any persecution against the Jews. Because once Jews are isolated from society and actually demonized, because what libels do, they demonize Jews, they dehumanize us. Once we dehumanize, and we're no longer human, perceived through other people, and because we're no longer perceived as human, they feel it's okay. They're excluded from society, they're always demonized, then it's okay to actually commit violence against them because they're not human.
Right. Yeah, and this is, again, like, this isn't a new pattern.
No, it's
we've
not.
seen, right? And that's the worst part about it, is that we can point to, examples in history, not only where we've seen it before, or where it's led to catastrophic outcomes.
Yes.
For example, the Holocaust, for lack of a better example. So let me ask you about that. You mentioned the cycle of libels. So for our listeners and our viewers, would love for you to just sort of, I know you explained it in summary a little bit here, but really to just go through this cycle. And again, like, also, and I'll follow up with this afterwards, but would love to talk about how these present themselves in today's world, and how the anti-Zionist crowd has done such a great job of creating, turning these libels into perceived truth effectively, and that we're fighting back against, that we're forced to prove these lies rather than the other way around.
Yes, exactly. So the essence of Jew hatred has always been the libels and conspiracy theories. So libelous Jews throughout the centuries, throughout the history, is actually always led to organized violence against the Jews. So anti-Jewish libels will latch on whatever dominant ideologies are trending at the time today to amplify their reach. So they serve as tool for demonization and the double standards, again, to delegitimize the Jewish nation or the individual Jew, basically. And libels they use as systemic, basically. It is a key thing is to use them as systemic in this cycle. And libels are the accusation of control, of cruelty, and conspiracy is accusation of power and control. And when you see libels such as, racial polluters, right? And then you will see like something like accusation of power would be like oppressors, right? And accusation of would be an genocide libel is the accusation, like that would be the actual, libel. So in this case, and the step one is always demonizing, to demonize the Jews. So it's the libels. The libels are the step one. So first you demonize like the Jew individually or a whole collection of the people, and you create a language. So all the libels and conspiracies are all around the language that are the trending at the time. So in anti-Judaism, it would be all about a religious language, like the blood libels, right. The Christ killers, right? The well poisoners. That was then, and then you will see the anti-Semitic libels would be, against the Jews control the economy, and Jews are capitalists or Jews are socialists. This is what anti-Semites used to.
So I'm going to pause you there for a second to just clarify, is that when you say anti-Semitic, you're talking about the era where Jew hatred was about race rather than
about race.
religion.
Sorry, you're right.
No, it's okay. I know that because we use the word anti-Semitism.
And it's about race. Yes, you're right.
But this specifically, you're referring to, the difference between the religious libels and the racial libels. Okay, so
and yes, and then yes. So in the racial, yes. So we're in the racial era. era, which is anti-Semitic era, it's all about the race. So it's about the purity of race. So therefore, we're racial polluters, and therefore, this is how Nazis justified.
Right.
They wanted to purify themselves from Jews, so they justify of executing and demonizing us. So then, in anti-Zionist era, it's all about it's a projection of their accusation, basically of the colonizer, the apartheid, or it will be the genocide.
So this is part one. This is the demonization.
This is the demonization.
Part two in the cycle.
Yeah. So part two is when we go into basically once they demonize, it's the next step is actually exclude us from society. So the exclusion can come into purging, boycotting, excluding us from various functions. It could be economical exclusion, professional exclusions, various exclusion. I think everybody's familiar of those exclusions because, as is in the Soviet Union, a lot of Jews been very much, excluded from a lot of areas.
Right.
Jews could not go in certain professions completely.
And in some cases, especially going back to the anti-Jewish era.
Yeah.
In that era, they were forbidden to even live in certain places if they didn't assimilate and join the religion of choice in that particular region. They were either killed or forced to leave. So this is like a lack of participation we can't even imagine right now.
Yeah, so in anti-Judaism, you could actually convert and, redeem yourself. But anti-Semites, because it's a racial base, you couldn't even redeem yourself. You're irredeemable at that point. It doesn't matter. You basically had to be exterminated completely.
At the anti-Semitic point,
anti-Semitic, yes.
Yeah, so then think about it. What do they say about Zionists?
Zionists, again, it's about the Jewish nation.
No, but I mean in terms of like willingness to exterminate or be rid of?
Because of genocide, we committed genocide. Because we're colonizer.
But I'm saying it's gotten worse, right?
It's
like in the beginning, it was like, just please leave, just go away. Then it was, all right, now we got to kill you all. And the third is that now not only are we going to kill you in secret, like in Nazi Germany, but now it's like the world will openly say, like with the folks at the Washington embassy, that they deserved it. And that they would say the same thing about us. There's definitely going to be somebody in this comment section who will probably write that you and I should die.
Yes, and that's why they're excluding us. They will exclude us from society. Once we're excluded from society, we look like completely irrelevant. We're basically it's going to step and committing violence against us or harassing us. It's so easy. But now the society accepted it. It's normalized because all the demonization was already normalized. So when you look at how it's been normalized in Canada, Canada is the fastest radicalization country in the world. So when you're looking at that, this is now normalized in Canada about what they say about the Jews. It's in a violent stage. The stage 3 is the violence and harassment against the Jews. But that stage, it never goes directly into massacre, never goes directly into killing. It starts with harassment. Remember how you said after October 7, they started with just leave us. It's harassing and protesting on masses on the street and just chanting Free Palestine. Later, it became stabbing in the supermarket, shooting in the schools, and eventually it will go into massacre. What happens in Australia is not a surprise because it's been escalated. So it's like a boiling the frog. Yeah. It's slowly, each step of the way.
It's really hard because I think that in our role, at Stand With Us Canada and on social media, on this podcast, you want to try very hard to not, elicit fear and to be perceived as trying to, incite fear in our community. And I don't believe we should be fearful. I think we need to be strong and proud and stand up, right?
And that's the reason.
So that's right. But then at the same time, we need to acknowledge these truths that Bondi Beach wasn't this, dramatic surprise of how could this have happened? It was like you sort of just described, that we've seen week after week or month after month since October 7th, the boundaries just get pushed further and further.
They always will push it.
And they just see, right? Exactly.
Because it's a new normalization.
Right.
It's normalized at one level, they will always push to the next level. And because we as a Jewish community around the world, we never confronted the libels. Never, ever. So we just let it go. And because we're a Jewish people are a nation of scholars. And Alexander the Great, when he asked basically, who are the Jewish people? And Aristotle says, they're the nation of philosophers, because Aristotle was fascinating about the Jewish people. So we're a nation of philosophers. We're not activists. We are scholars. We argue among ourselves. We're thinking, people gonna, will know better. They're gonna look at the facts. They're gonna look at the history. It's not the case. Libels has nothing to do with the history and facts. And anti-Zionist is a hate movement. Has nothing to do with history and facts. They don't care about facts. They just care about libeling us and just throwing at everything they can. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. Obviously, it's not true. And then because we're not responsible, responding, we thinking that the society will know better, but that's not the case. The society normalizes basically this, and because we're being demonized, and that's why they accept the violence.
Well, there's two things that society does. Society, first of all, like you said, they first of all, they don't know any better. They hear these things and they don't know, especially when it comes to Jewish people, one of the smallest minorities on the planet.
Yeah.
They don't know whether these things are true or not, and if you hear something horrible, you're likely to believe it.
Exactly.
You know? But the other thing that they do as well is they fear the mob, right? Like,
yes.
If it's politicians that are seeking re-election, or even just a regular person in their office that's listening to everyone around them talk and saying horrible things about Jewish people, about Israelis, Zionists, whatever, the average person is not going to stand up and be like, well, hold on a second, guys. Like, has anyone here really ever researched this stuff? What you're saying sounds pretty hateful. Like, it's challenging to be that person, especially for Jewish people, right? So not only are they not aware and not able to sort of push back, but the average person is going to just sit there quietly and sort of accept it, even Jews and Zionists, because most people aren't actually equipped to go out and to have these conversations.
And also, it's a failure in education system to begin with, because there is nobody teaches geography properly anymore. They're not teaching anymore a history. People, if you actually, because I actually gave a lecture yesterday to teachers, a whole bunch of teachers, and we talked about that. And one of the teachers said something really fascinating that it's stuck in my head. That she said when somebody wrote, created a T-shirt on Free Palestine, and another kid a Jewish kid was really upset about it, is that. But she came in and started talking to them and said, can you show me, basically look at the map. Where is Palestine? Where is Israel? And how many Jews actually, and when kids couldn't actually show where Israel is on a map. Not only this, people thought Israel is huge, and people think
kingdom.
It's a kingdom. It's a huge kingdom.
Yeah.
And when people, and when you actually ask kids how many Jews are on this planet, people think there are billions. But we're only 15 million, and not all of them live in Israel. And when you compare that to how many Arabs there are surrounded by Israel, right? We're talking about billions. And kids don't know that. Kids are not educated about this. And when you actually give them about colonizer, oppressor, and genocide, you all of a sudden, make it look like Israel is, it is violent, it's huge, and it's right. But it's all because they don't know that, because they're not taught, and it's a failure in the education system.
Right. And again, this is understandable that people would feel this way when they hear these things, when they hear these horrible words that they would. But at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to educate, and I think we see it every day at Stand With Us with what we're doing on campuses. We go and we have these conversations with students. You'd be surprised, people think that it's all violent, all hateful, all harassment, the people that come over and say the craziest things to us from the beginning are usually the ones who end up leaving being like, wow, you've given me a whole new world to think about. Thank you for all this information. I've never heard this perspective before. Because most people that are the most extreme in their views come to it because they know the least about things, right? And they're just hearing this stuff on campus. And so we see it. There's very a lot of value in having these conversations. Yeah. And I want to just ask you one last question.
I wanted to kind of finish off the cycle because we didn't finish the cycle.
We didn't finish? Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, in the cycle, there is a very important step. It's called the denial narratives. So what they do is, they deny what they just committed. So the anti-Zionist or Jew haters, when you take a look at the cycle for thousands of years, it's the same. So basically Jewish oppression, Jewish persecution is denied. So what it means is they deny it's ever happened. So if their massacre happened, October 7 happened, the rapes happened on October 7, everything happened on October 7 or Holocaust, it's being denied. If it's anti-Semite, they will deny the Holocaust. If it's anti-Zionist, they will deny October 7, and they will deny the terrors that's happening in Israel. Right. So that it will gives them the legitimization of continue to do it next, because they just denied everything that happened. And this is a perfect cycle for Jew haters to repeat over and over again. And what's really the key ingredient in the cycle are the token Jews. Token Jews are the key ingredient as a cycle because they use their Judaism as a shield, as tokenization is basically to legitimize all of this anti-Jewish and Jew hatred against the Jews. They will legitimize it, whether it's anti-Zionist or anti-Semitism or whatever it is. In each era, there will always be token Jews, and unfortunately, anti-Zionism has a lot of them. And the first ever token Jewish organization as anti-Zionist was actually created during the Russian Revolution. It's called Yevseska. What it means in Russian, it's Еврейская секция, literally means the Jewish section of the Communist Party. That's what it means. So what did they do? They actually went around and literally stripped Jews from cultural centers, from closed down the religious centers. Synagogue did not allow Jews to practice anything, stripped them down of any Judaism possible. And if you do not convert to communism, basically what they did, they send you to the gulags, they execute you, or you were persecuted. So basically, and that is what was in this Soviet oppression. This is not far what was happening here as well. It's just in a different way. But this is what's happening in the Soviet time.
Well, it happens in every era, and it's happening now too. And it's the same thing as I kind of just mentioned, where people feel in society pressure to fit into like what the conforming view. And I think Jews fall for that too as well. I think we talked a lot about before how this idea of in the West, Jews were so comfortable for so long that they refused to push back against libels that they were hearing around them, because they said, well, what's better, to like fight this or to just sit quietly because it will go away?
You cannot sit quietly.
It's not going away, right? There's no option.
It will never will.
But what I'm saying is that then the more extreme version of that is, the people who are saying, well, look, like...
The only way to break the cycle, by the way, is through actually talking about it and exposing it.
Of course, because look, the cycle is built for a reason. It's built to manipulate society,
exactly,
right?
Yes.
This is what's happening. You're manipulating the masses because they are unwilling and unable to speak out against the masses. And what easier group to build a mass against than the smallest religious minority on the planet, right?
Yes.
I mean, like, it's a no-brainer. In almost every scenario, you're going to have a large enough group of people that can, facilitate this cycle of libel that you're describing.
Yeah.
And the thing I think is the most fascinating, and I want to just sort of pivot a little bit, is the way that it actually, like, we can see the way it manifests itself on the ground in Israel and Gaza and Judea and Samaria, and the way it affects Israelis and Palestinians. Because anyone who has studied this long enough and is well enough aware and is telling themselves the truth about the situation on the ground understands that Hamas only exists to keep their thumb on the Palestinian people in order to create violence between Israel, to have dead Palestinians that they can then call genocided or right. Like, we know exactly what's going on. This isn't a mystery. I'm not unveiling some grand secret, but it goes to show you when you talk about the cycle of libel that it's like, okay, so now before it was the Jewish people, right, which we call Am Yisrael.
Yeah.
Even before we had the nation of Israel, it didn't matter. Jews around the globe were the target of persecution. So all of a sudden, we take that group and put ourselves in Israel. I always say the dream for anti-Semites around the globe would be if we would all move to Israel, right? If they could get us all in one place, because then they could use the actions of that country to demonize the entire people, or worse, violence, which we won't talk about, but that's not the point. What I'm trying to say is that the evolution of the state of Israel was actually an anti-Semite's dream in many cases, because now they had a punching bag for the Jews. They had something they could point to on the global stage. And so what does it take now? Well, we have to make these people look very bad, right? Put Hamas there, keep these Palestinians locked up in Gaza, and just make them the punching bags so that the Iranians and everyone else, this whole axis, can make Israel look as they are. And that is what you're describing, is this like cycle of libel, that they actually had to manipulate the situation, find a way to demonize Israel, to exclude Jews around the world, to then commit violence against Jews around the world, deny that violence, do it all over
and then
again.
go again.
Yeah.
And the cycles, where what I call it, this is the spiral of the cycle of libels. We are literally in a spiral of cycle of libels. And the reason is because it escalates every time. With each cycle, it repeats itself, but it's escalated every time with more libels, with more conspiracies, more denial, more violence, and more exclusions. And the problem is, if we don't, because we're not confronting, we don't talk about that, we don't break the cycle, it continues to the next level until major violence erupts.
Right.
Like, God forbid, the massacre or something like that.
So I feel like I've given my perspective a little bit on why this exists, like why this cycle of libels exists, and more importantly, why anti-Zionism and Jew hatred is so palatable for generations of our world. But why do you think it's become so socially acceptable, particularly in academic spaces as well? These anti-Jewish libels. What makes them so digestible for Canadians?
Well, it makes them digestible because anti-Zionism, it is a virtue, and virtue is hate. Because it comes as a justice, social justice, because it masks itself as a social justice and disguises itself in that language why would it be any different? Like, and if you speak against it, you may look like you're against the social justice. And because it's considered to be fashionable. So there's one of my articles that I actually talk about why anti-Semitism cannot help anti-Zionism. And the reason is because over 100 years ago, when in 1879, Wilhelm Marr, when he coined anti-Semitism in Germany, he's basically saying that he's not anti-Jewish. He has nothing against the Jewish religion. He's just anti-Semite. He's against the Jewish race. And this is how he puts it. And basically, it was so fashionable to be anti-Semite against the racially, because it looked like Jews are racially impure. This is how he put it. And it was for decades before Nazism, but Nazism came from this, evolved from this. So when you look at it, it was so fashionable back then to be anti-Semite that it was the restaurants and everywhere excluded Jews and openly say clubs or hotels or restaurants will say no Jews allowed. And this was even way before Nazism existed.
Right.
Yeah, so the same thing, because it's only until 1945, until the Holocaust, when anti-Semitism became declared as a Jew hatred,
Right.
as a hate movement. And then we don't need to wait until another Holocaust to happen to declare it as a Jew hatred, because it is a Jew hatred and language matters. And the thing is, because it's hiding behind the social justice and it has a new mask, and this is why I talk about the new face of an old hate. It is a new face because now it's an open season to basically to be Jew, like a hater against the Jews and say whatever they want, because that is exactly what the Soviet wanted. They wanted to say anything against Zionists, knowing that it's exactly meant Jews, without any percussions. And nowadays, anti-Zionism is fashionable, and as long as it's going to be fashionable, as long as it's acceptable, that's what we're facing. And the way to make it not acceptable, that we declare that anti-Zionism is a Jew hatred, which is the reason we launched the declaration. Anti-Zionism is a Jew hatred. As one of the triggers that actually we realized it is when the Stand With Us case against MIT, and where there was a loss, unfortunately. And the reason the judge wrongly say that it is where we're not consistent with definition of anti-Zionism,
Right.
and the judge rejected, and that saying that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, he rejected that it's anti-Zionism is a Jew hatred and say it's a political criticism, and this is why he allowed what happened. This is a very sad case, and in fact it sets precedence to every other case to come. By the way, this is a second case. It was not the first case. Language matters. We need to make it culturally change and change culturally that anti-Zionism is a Jew hatred, because it's formed, it's a new mutated, or I call it actually cancer. So, and we're in a stage 4 cancer right now of anti-Zionism. We have to declare that it's a Jew hatred. And once we declare it, we can then demand from politicians, from elite, and then actually law enforcement will continue and enforce, making sure that anti-Zionism doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is a strategy that makes sense, but a strategy that we have failed to meet, for so long.
We need to unite. Yeah.
Uniting is one thing. I think, I'll come back to that piece in a second, but that's the one thing I think that surprises people the most, is how coordinated and organized this whole effort is.
Yeah.
And I think that when you look at these libels through history, you see coordination through generations of people learning from each other on how to demonize the Jewish people. And in the example that I gave before, where what's happening in the West, the coordination of Jew hatred here in the West is directly, you could say, it's manufactured in the same way that violence against Palestinians is manufactured by the Iranian axis, right?
Exactly.
So you could say, all right, well, if both of these things are being manufactured to the same goal, then, you could almost say that they must be being coordinated at some level.
Very well coordinated.
So what I want to know is this, okay? I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, they're sitting in some room somewhere in Qatar and they're building this plan, and they're obviously not. But through your research and studies and writing, what have you learned about what actually takes place physically on the ground in Israel and with Palestinians is coordinated in conjunction with not just these libels and these efforts through, to demonize through, social media and through public sentiment, but then the third piece, which is, there's advocacy. There are people that are plugged into academic institutions, that are working in government, that are lobbyists. There are all these different legs to facilitating Jew hatred.
Yes.
I don't presume that there actually in lockstep, but they sure operate that way. What have you learned about how they operate together?
Well, it's a long conversation.
Yeah.
The research that I've done, we have on our team, we also have a behavioral scientist, Dr. Brian Kugelman, who's actually very well aware of how this all happens and what campaigns they run. So the campaigns, it is a complicated topic because they run very sophisticated campaigns. And I actually have done a research and comparison what campaigns they run and how they position in their vision and what their purpose in this versus to actually what we do as a Jewish community, which we don't run a campaign, we don't respond, we don't do say, we actually, we react. We're in a reaction mode. We're not really confronting them. We're really reacting to what they say. They are building narratives and we're reacting to the narrative that they built, and we never even reframe to their narrative. And because we're not reframing, we're staying in their frame, we by definition will fail, and we're helping them to win.
And even by not defining anti-Zion, like even by having separate definitions for anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and having sentences where we say things like anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are unacceptable forms of no, they're the same thing. You wouldn't say like anti-black racism and racism towards a black person are very bad. People will be like, what? That's a redundant. Yeah. We have to correct, like you said, our language and our communication.
It has to be reframed.
But the other thing we also have to do is work together to come to a point where we can say, okay, look, we need to work in lockstep to make sure that we're communicating the same things to everyone, to academia, to media, to government, to the elite.
Yes.
Because right now, like you said, we're in a position where we have no support because the law enforcement and politicians don't feel like they need to because they're appealing to the majority.
Exactly.
So anyways, carry on. I feel like I cut you off a little bit.
That's okay. So this is why the declaration is so important, because one, we're actually declaring, we're uniting together. We consistent now in the message that anti-Zionism is a Jew hatred, and we're asking people to do those steps as when you declare that it's a Jew hatred, there is a reason why you declare that, and this is what it means. And this is step one. And the other step is where education is very key thing that we need to do, and teaching people to actually equip them, not just educating what anti-Zionism is, but that's an important piece. So it's one, education is about, yes, this is anti-Zionism, this is active education about anti-Zionism, the history around it, what it is, how what it actually, the libels around it, and the other education is about the reframing. So one of the things we do specialize as well is how do you reframe. We don't know that. Like most of the Jewish community doesn't know that because we're not activists. We are a nation of scholars. So we like to argue, we debate, we rely on history and and everything else and facts. Here we need to learn how to reframe the situation, and we should not be defensive. We're not in a position. We're not criminals. We should not defend ourselves. Should not be on trial. By we defending Israel and ourselves as a Jewish nation, the Jewish people, we basically putting a premise that we are in trial. We put ourselves on trial. We're not guilty. We should not be putting ourselves in trial, and put attention spotlight right on anti-Zionists, because when they tell you, it's you're a genocidal. No, it's a genocide. It's a libel, and its libels have been used for generation to persecute Jews. So we have to reframe that. It's not. We should not say we're not genocidal. We should say that's a genocide libel. We should actually. We always name the abuse and the abuser. So we name what it is. It's a genocide libel. You right away tell them that's a libel.
And what do you think about flipping the narrative to remind them about Hamas and sort of their charter and their articulation?
Yes, of course. But it's one of the I actually for each libel. I can actually debunk each libel and reframe it and show it. So when somebody tells me colonizer libel, I say, great. Okay, so let's see. How do you spot a colonizer? I'm not talking about myself. I say, how do you spot a colonizer? How many countries speak English? How many countries speak French on this world? Spanish and Arabic. How many countries speak Arabic? How many countries speak Hebrew? How many people speak Hebrew on this planet? This is how you can tell who is actually a colonizer. And when you look at, and like people, what? Because when you see it visually, right? And then you show them the map. Who's the colonizer? That's another thing I do. Show them the map. On the map world, you show all the, the Muslim countries, all the Christian countries. Where's Jewish country? Where's Jewish nation? That little thing over there, that's a map. We are the colonizer. We colonized everything.
I actually think it's more important, not more important, but equally important, I should say, to showcase old maps, from the Arab countries to say, well, we want to talk about what's actually, in my opinion, the greatest decolonization story in human history, right? Is that we were colonized everywhere we went, booted out from the countries and places that we called home for generations.
Yeah.
And now we've found our indigenous ancestral homeland and restored our people and brought our language and our faith back into, the forefront of just one tiny little community. And the hardest part for me, I think, and, because I hope our listeners know how to, at least get into these I don't want to spend too much time sort of explaining the actual, arguments against the libels, but they're so easy to debunk. Like, let's look at real genocides, not just the Holocaust, other genocides that have taken place, has the population grown over the duration of that time? Again, like Hamas just put out new numbers recently that like vehemently contradict any notion that there could have been a genocide taking place as it related to the percentage of combatants that were killed over the course of the last 2.5 years. So the information is there for people. They just need to choose to use it. I think that's the most important part.
But they don't choose to use it.
They don't choose to use it, which is the challenge.
Yeah, but one important thing I wanted to mention is about the apartheid libel. When people actually talk about the apartheid libel, and the apartheid libel is really, it's the Soviets, what they've done is they actually pushed on to project, the Western activist projection onto Israel. So when you look at it, it's basically Western crimes onto Israel. So when you look at the British projection of what they've done in India and in Africa, and the same with the French and the Netherlands, their projection onto Israel, their crimes and what they've done in Africa, and they projected in Israel. There is no apartheid in Israel. But they also forget, I also show people, most of people don't even know. Yesterday at the lecture, I showed people about the apartheid libel about slavery, modern slavery on this planet. When you look at all the modern slavery on this planet, where is it located? In all the countries in the Middle East and North Africa. So when you see this country, there is still slavery in Saudi Arabia. There's still slavery. And this is modern days. Still in 2021 statistics show that to you. And there is 11,000 still Palestinian Arabs who are considered al-Bid. It's called in Arabic the slaves. So basically it's because they were black. So there is still, and there is a whole village in Gaza that is called Al-Abid. Nobody talks about that because people don't want to talk about a real apartheid. People like to talk about, and project onto Israel their own crimes.
Well, this is sort of what you're describing is like everything that Israel is blamed for in the relationship with Gaza and with Hamas, the Palestinians, is actually the inverse, right?
Exactly.
And they're being forced into these situations where the world believes they know when they're starting this fight with Israel what's going to happen in the headlines the next day.
And one of the things that I always tell people is actually Dr. Sigmund Freud. He always says, every projection is accusation. Every accusation is a projection.
Yes.
So whatever they accuse, they're projecting it on us.
And it's the same thing. Like, it's not just about on a scale of a country, right? Like what you're saying is 100% true, but it's also on like the human scale, right? That like the things that anti-Zionists accuse Jews of. I don't even mean Israelis. I mean like people that are defending Israel online or in person. They give us their playbook because they accuse us of doing these things, and we're like, where did this come from? And I'm trying to rack my brain for an example right now, but it's just like, the cherry picking of facts and stories, the complete creation and fabrication of new narratives and storylines, and you're listening to them. You give them like hard facts, and they say, no, you're making this up. This is a classic Zionist propaganda. This is Mossad propaganda. And this is what I really think it's important for us to get across to our community right now, is that, and you touched on this earlier, we're dealing from a position of strength as it relates to the facts and the history. That is about it. We are not in a position of strength when it comes to numbers, platform, audience, but we have the facts on our side. We just need to be really comfortable with how we share them, how we talk about them, but we need to know, and that's, I guess, what keeps me, and I'm sure you too, really grounded in your work, is that at the end of the day, I believe in our people, in our state, in our government, in our army, the way they operate, and that I can have that sort of underlying, confidence in what I'm saying, that I know like we are on the right side of this.
We are on the right side of history, yes, you're right. But we also have to learn, for 2,000 years, Jews have run away.
Yes,
we run away for
100%.
2,000 years. We do not know how to react. We don't know how to fight back. The only way we fight back is when we are living in Israel to survive. But here in the diaspora, we never knew. Every time there was something happening, we ran away to another country.
Yeah.
So the reality is there is nowhere to run anymore. We are right now surrounded by anti-Zionists all over the world, globally, whether it's outside Israel or around Israel. And where there's nowhere to run, now it's a time to confront these libels, break the cycle. Now it's a time to declare that anti-Zionism is Jew hatred, and it's a time to fight back. We should not be being in emergency mode all the time in damage control. So this is what the Jewish community is doing. It's in a damage control. It's basically every time there is a new narrative coming out that is created by the anti-Zionists, they're going into damage control and reacting and within the enemy framework. Instead, they have to reframe, learn how to create a new narrative, reframe it to show the spotlight on anti-Zionists and figure out a way that how we actually need to have a campaign that we fight back this. And it is possible to do. It's just a matter of doing it and us united figure out how to do it. And it's not when people say, yeah, but they're so well funded, they have a limited fund. It's not about the funds. It's about us being organized. It's about us reframing. It's about us actually creating a proper plan and actually fight this.
Well, it's the way that they coordinate versus the way that we do not.
They're
right?
well coordinated.
Like when you go to to the encampment, to a protest, to a BDS motion, to whatever it is.
Yes.
They are the people who are in attendance are following instructions. They're doing what they're told. They're speaking when they're supposed to speak. They're using the talking points that were agreed upon.
Yes,
There's no deviation. There's no individualism, which is not a good thing, obviously, to a certain extent.
That's a different point,
right?
Yes, yeah.
But what I mean is, to a certain degree, they are so well organized.
Yes, extremely.
That it's not like we are a very capable people. It is not about funding. Like I said, when you have the facts, that gives you like 90% of a head start. You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
but they don't care about the facts.
Who doesn't? The anti-Zionists?
As the Zionists don't care about the facts.
No, but what I mean is that if we use the facts to our advantage proactively, instead of responding all the time and being so reactionary, we can use the truth to do what you talked about, to build up good faith with the elite, with our neighbors, with the government, with allies, right?
Yes.
Like to work proactively to fight back against these libels so that more people in our world are prepared to, when they hear them, to say, wait a sec, hold on, let me stop you right there before you infect my workplace with this type of libel, with these types of lies.
Yeah.
That proactivity is what we are missing. And yeah, I think just to your point that we really need to get organized in the same way that they are. And I think that the one thing you said, we have nowhere else to run. But we also have to acknowledge that fighting is good, but it's only good if it's done the right way.
Exactly.
Right? And
of
we
course.
can't keep having so many people in our world that think they know the right way and that their way is right. We need to have an agreement that everyone's probably going to be a little bit wrong somewhere. No one's going to be right. And we're going to work together to come up with a solution, which at least at that point we will agree upon after lots of hard work and discussion, and then we can implement together. Because right now, whether it's organizations Jewish organizations, or whether it's volunteers in the grassroots, or whether it's Jewish day schools, there are so many pieces that are operating independently of each other that need to be brought into a cohesive strategy.
Exactly.
Because it doesn't matter how hard you try otherwise. There's a lot of questions around that.
And we've been trying this as part of Stop Antizionism to work with different Jewish organizations to explain to them the situation and basically, first of all, educate. This is what anti-Zionism is. Because a lot of them are not aware. They don't see that as a threat. They think it's episodical, but it is ideological. Once you understand this is ideological war, then you understand, and once you understand this Jew hatred is ideological, and it's actually genealogy, that it comes from Soviet genealogy, which is Soviet anti-Zionism, Islamic anti-Zionism, and then Western anti-Zionism. Once you understand that and understand the key threats in the Western anti-Zionism, and most of people not aware of it, that is that DI is the delivery mechanism to anti-Zionism. But people don't understand why. And when you explain to them, because anti-Zionism was born in a Marxist ideology, a form of Marxist ideology, which is communist, Soviet Union. Therefore, any forms of Marxist ideology, any type of form, will be a conduit, a perfect conduit for transforming and basically the anti-Zionism. And DI is the form of Marxist ideology, and this is why it is perfectly thrived in the Western institutionalized anti-Zionism. That is, and once you explain that to organization, then there's realize, wow, I didn't realize that, and now we need to, because once you cut off the DI and we cut off the Marxist ideology around it, then it's not going to have the conduit anymore. It's basically every cancer needs some conduit, and once you cut it off, you basically you suffocate the cancer.
Right. Yeah. These like DEI infrastructures and like the woke politics and like these virtue signaling, like this is sort of the body that
yes, exactly,
that hosts the cancer that you're describing.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, so Natasha, we only have a few minutes left, and I just want to. There's two things I want to do. I didn't get a chance throughout to ask you a question that I thought was interesting, and we sort of touched on it, but I did really want to ask you, as someone who grew up, in the Soviet Union. I know you touched on what it was like, but we didn't really talk about the parallels that you see in terms of the evolution. Would love to touch on that, and then just generally as well before you wrap up. As we look to the future, we've talked a lot about being proactive, this, that, whatever. I don't want to be repetitive in any way. Is there anything that we didn't touch on? And we could start with this question, then I'll come back to the one about the Soviet Union. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you think is critical for us as a society, as a Jewish community, to really focus on now as we shift into both this attempt to be more proactive and an understanding that we now live in this new era of Jew hatred, this anti-Zionist era of Jew hatred? What can we be thinking about as we try to change our focus?
Yes. So I have the 5-step, I call it reclaim, of what people can do in anti-Zionist era. So so those steps are very important, and obviously the education of people. We have to talk about and break the cycle of libel. And one of the things is that language is so important. And declares Jew hatred, right? Anti-Zionism is Jew hatred, but also at the same time is what do you do? How do you show that anti-Zionism is actually a Jew hatred, like visually?
Right.
Then you drop the hyphen. Why is dropping the hyphen to make such a big thing?
Yes.
So when you show the same as anti-Semitism, by the way, anti-Semitism dropped the hyphen because Semitism had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. So we're dropping the hyphen because anti-Zionism has nothing to do with Zionism.
Right.
It's all about a Jew hatred. It's just a mutated Jew hatred, and this is why we're dropping the hyphen, and we have one word. It's not a political critique. It is a Jew hatred, parallel to anti-Semitism. When you show that is a big thing. And obviously work with allies, educate everyone, churches, community centers, anywhere. We have a lot of good allies, a lot of support. So we need to leverage that and work with them. And basically, again, as a community, we can together unite and to come up with and this is what I've been working on together with Dr. Nylecht and Dr. Kugelman as one, Brian Kugelman, is as a strategy, as an education and the campaign of how do we reframe the narrative and how we teach the community, basically everyone, to reframe the narrative and understand how we fight this anti-Zionism. And at all level. It didn't have to be only school level, which we already created a curriculum for middle school and high school, and we can help as well. Like we also have the university level education and the same and different level education and professional life. But other than that, we like I said, we unite and we work together, and instead of being segmented, because this is what anti-Zionists want. And don't focus on yourself. Don't internalize the response. When we respond and we basically confront anti-Zionists, don't talk about yourself. Nobody cares. Nobody cares what things that Israel done, that we actually invented the cherry tomatoes. Nobody cares about that. What we do care about, like you put a spotlight on anti-Zionists so people can know who are anti-Zionists. They're the Jew haters. So talk about them. Instead of talk about yourself, talk about them. And this is really important. Talk about anti-Zionism as much as possible.
For sure. Is that a movement that you would want to be a part of, right? Like if I described this to you as like this Free Palestine movement is actually constructed and made up of people who are just doing this due to their hatred for Jewish people, do you as like an everyday Canadian want to be a part of that movement? Probably not, right? Like
it's not only for Jew hatred. It is anti-Zionist. It's not just anti-Jewish or a Jew hatred. Anti-Zionist is a threat to civilization.
It's Marxist.
It's Marxist, and anti-Zionist is a threat to democracy. It's threat to the free world and the free speech.
So that's actually a great point that I feel like we haven't hit yet, is that many times Jews are used as sort of a vehicle to create societal change, right? To build up a scapegoat of some kind that people can say, okay, look, this is a problem.
Exactly.
So good. Now we've eradicated the Jews. Let's deal with the rest of the problem, right? That now they always say, like, Saturday people first, Sunday people second, right? What starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. This is the same idea here, right? That they're trying to create this new society where everything is perceived to be either black or white, good or bad, oppressor or oppressed.
Exactly.
And the goal would be to eliminate anyone who disagrees. What better way to eliminate entire groups of people than starting with one, showing you can do it, and then, all right, well, now we're done with the Zionists, aka Jews, on to the next group. And I think that's a really important piece that we haven't really touched on yet.
Yes, and one thing I wanted to add to it, because I just remember, like, that's evolved to this, is scapegoating. Basically, scapegoating Jews, it's been existent for thousands of years. So every time there is a problem anywhere, the first people or anybody that who's going to be blamed, it's always the Jews. Why? Because it's easier to blame somebody than actually fix the problem. Right. So I always ask people in my session, are they anyone aware of the protocols of the Elders of Zion? So this is the protocols that were specifically created in the Russian Empire just to scapegoat Jews. Why? Because there were economical problems. There were so many problems in the Russian Empire before the Russian Revolution, and this is why they created the whole protocols of the Elders of Zion, because they needed a scapegoat. It's better to scapegoat Jews and blame them for everything than actually fix the problem yourself. And since then, even in the Soviet time, if there is a problem, it's like blame the Jews for everything. Во всем грехах жиды виноваты. This is literally in Russian means every sin is Jewish problem. And this is a typical, it's not a joke, but this is what Russians use. And the thing is, this is, you scapegoat the Jews, and when you see the same thing happening in Canada, when you see, genocide libel, and you see when our politicians are actually scapegoating us first and saying, oh, genocide libel. Why are you talking about genocide libel? We have problems in Canada. We have economic problems in Canada. Canada is in the worst condition than it ever was. I remember I've been here for so many years, for 3 decades, and I see that Canada is in the worst condition. This is not what Canada used to be. Canada was the best country in the world to live in, but look where we are now.
And that's the only thing that every Canadian can agree on, right? Whether you're politically left or right,
exactly.
Everybody agrees that the shape of this country is extremely poor. We just disagree on the reason why.
Yeah.
So I guess, the key takeaway, I guess, from, what we were trying to, just discuss of this notion of how can we shift our thinking. There's a lot of stuff. And I hope that over the course of like this hour, I think we've probably been discussing, I hope that, those listening or watching have been able to take away plenty. But I think the key area of focus would be to focus on this idea of anti-Zionism, of dropping the hyphen, of understanding that it is not a political movement. We are not trying to defend ourselves and explain why it is wrong to be anti-Israel. We are trying to explain to people why being anti-Israel is inherently anti-Jewish, and why certain behaviors that are called anti-Zionist actions, behaviors, protests are actually anti-Semitic. That's the challenge we face as a community.
Yes, and why being so obsessive only about one little country on the whole planet? Everyone is so obsessive about that. It just tells you that it's anti-Zionism. Yeah. It's a Jew hatred. It has nothing to do with criticism of Israel.
For sure.
It's nothing to do with criticism of a country. It has everything to do with just being Jew hatred.
It's layered, for sure. And but I think like when we phrase it like that, that's where we struggle, right? Is we need to understand how we explain this to people who don't just inherently understand that this is anti-Semitic.
Exactly.
As you know, and I'm excited for your book to come out so I can, we can read it and hopefully, share it with others as well, so they can understand how this historical anti-Semitism, what people always imagine as, images of Jews with horns and tails and money, and no, that is historical anti-Semitism. Modern anti-Semitism is genocide libels, apartheid libels, is barring Zionists from spaces on campus or beyond, when really we know this is modern anti-Semitism that we need to explain to people. And so, like, I guess that's all I wanted to sort of drive home here at the end, is to say, like, we're trying to restore, like, intellectual honesty about Israel, so that people can understand that the efforts to distort Israel have reasoning behind them, which is to demonize the Jewish people.
Yes.
So I thank you, Natasha. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and the research that you've done shows in terms of what you've committed your career to at this point and much of your life to. I think it's so important because we're quite often being reactive, and when you look around the Jewish community, there are plenty of organizations and people, and the reactionary stuff is there. We need people to really focus on this proactive research and this thought and helping to articulate these ideas in ways that people can digest. So
Yes.
I thank you, very much for joining us today. We do have to wrap up, but I still feel like I'm fixated on asking this question. So we're going to ask it as sort of like a wrap-up question for you. In like 60 seconds, just because we're short on time. What are the most nerve-wracking parallels that you see in today's world versus the Soviet Union that you grew up in and the state-sponsored anti-Semitic propaganda that left Jews like you and your family forced to flee and to move to the West? What are those parallels that you're seeing today?
Oh, we have many parallels. Well, the libels, obviously, right? We have the libels and the state propaganda. Now it's all institutionalized. Right now, you cannot say. You have to watch what you say. You openly. It's very hard to be Jewish in Canada, which I never thought I ever gonna think of it at this point. In obviously in Russia and Soviet Union, it wasn't. You couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And the same. So it's the libels. It's how you live. You have to be quiet about it. It is exclusions. Now Jews are boycotted from everywhere. Pretty much, very much exclusions are. And in Soviet time, exclusions were everywhere.
So you're telling me what I was hoping you weren't, which is that it wasn't a specific thing that stands out, but it's just the general way of life.
But it's actually getting worse here now because. Like in Soviet Union, Jews were not dying on the streets. Like Jews were not attacked like this on the street. I mean, unless it's like gangs, but this is like, it's very unusual, right? The way the Soviets are very sophisticated. So the way they've done it, then institutionalized it in academia. They won't let you to progress. They won't let you to be in certain positions or, because you had there's called the fifth line in your passport, identified you as a Jew. If you're a Jew, that you can't progress somewhere. But the thing is, you can still live. And what Jews did, they double down on their, performance. They'll say, I'll be the best in what I can do. So that one spot that is available for everyone, I'll get into that one spot.
Yeah, because it is funny. This is obviously a stereotype, but every Russian Jew that I've met in Canada, when you talk about their careers, are so impressive. Like, I'm like a nuclear astrophysicist with like a specialization in like solving liver cancer. And
but do you know how long it took them to work towards it? A lot of people don't talk about it. And actually, I interviewed Soviet, and I interviewed many people for my book, for each chapter, and actually show that it has like facts and how it was life. And one of the persons that I interviewed her, and she actually talked about, people talk about how we actually perform, but nobody talks about how we got there.
Right.
How hard we had to work to outperform and get that position in the Soviet Union.
Right.
And the same thing would be happening here. Like this is very hard now.
Yeah,
like, it's basically
absolutely.
become a Jew, being a Jew.
It sure is. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us today. This, like I said before, was a fascinating conversation, and I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing. I encourage everyone to can they connect with you online, follow you somewhere?
Yeah, and
tell them where to follow you.
Yeah, you can follow me at basically on my social media at Natasha H. Pein, whether it's on X or on Instagram, and you can definitely go to our website stopaz.org. Stop Antizionism website.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So
we'll sign the declaration. And by the way, we do have symposium also coming up we're talking about anti-Zionism, bringing the language into and basically declaring that, exactly making a declaration that anti-Zionism is a Jew hatred. So the symposium is coming up in a couple of months. We're trying to sort it out and basically hoping it will be in May.
Beautiful. Well, I'm hoping that many listening will follow your work and will stay in touch and regarding the symposium and all of this great stuff that you're doing. But for now, thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen, to watch online. We appreciate your continued viewership. We continue to put together these great podcasts and bring together special guests for you. And we appreciate all the feedback in terms of, hearing that people have been enjoying, and I'm sure they enjoyed today, Natasha. So thank you very much. We will see you again in 2 weeks' time. As I always say, between now and then, feel free to check out old episodes. We are creeping up there. We've got quite the library now, so I encourage everyone to check it out. And we'll see you next time. On behalf of Stand With Us Canada, thank you for joining us.